seem like something from Cheech and Chong,
Right.
So it gives ability, to control signage, have, professional signage.
Location and proximity to things, each one of them being determined locally instead of a
What
state mandate.
about communities that have poorly written ordinances currently that apply beyond just the commercial practice of medical marijuana and that actually have intersected with the patient caregiver system? Would those, do you perceive that those will be upheld? Or will those be modified, or do you think that those are just going to continue to be challenged in court?
It's interesting because I represent, as a rep, I have 28 townships, 11 villages, and 2 cities. And I have sat through a lot of meetings where I've been watching different townships or different villages grappling with, the caregiver model and how they're going to approach it. And each one, will contact their lawyer and such, and it's amazing how they've all come up with different ideas and how to deal with it. So it will be interesting that now you're putting something out there, and I think I'm not sure if you'll see much uniformity, because so far, even with the caregiver model, each community's reacted a little bit differently.
Do you think that local regulation could be attached to the bill to where if they did embrace the bill, that this would be the regulation they would have to follow?
I see. So that it would supersede any previous regulation they've created? Is that what you're saying?
Or it'll give them a suggested model of a method of doing
right,
things.
instead of the confusion, they would have a model to just employ, basically, or, get going.
I know that guidance was part of it.
What's really been challenging about the caregiver model is you suddenly have a lot of people in their own homes that are doing something that is not necessarily residential. It almost has a business aspect to it or a commercial aspect to it in a way. It's not really a doctor's office. It's not really, it's not really a medicine factory. It's been this kind of quasi thing that's really challenged municipalities and what is this? How do we properly deal with it? And that's really the attitude I've seen. I have not seen in any meeting anyone say, we're not going to have medical marijuana, no way, no how. I've not seen that. I've just seen all the township officials, whether conservative or liberal, just want to do it right and want to make sure they're doing it right and want to make sure they're not going to end up with a legal problem.
What about asset forfeiture? How what impact is this going to have if the premise of some of the taking is on a federal level or the state level? There's what if someone's slightly over or whatever, there's some minor or what have you in there, or even if they are participating, there's a raid and there's usually property.
Under federal law, for instance, they can raid and seize the property.
You can't protect against that. I know that, and that wasn't the intent. Although
no, this would the feds for some reason moved into Michigan. Our state law does not supersede theirs. They'd have to use their own agents. They couldn't use the machinery of our law enforcement to enforce the federal law, and even by choice, like say your county sheriffs or something want to enforce federal law. No, they can't.
Right. That's the 10th Amendment there, rearing its head right there. And but what about state law enforcement? There's always been this. I mean, it's always kind of been a issue that goes along with the war on drugs, but even more so now with the medical marijuana community in situations when you have people from the medical cannabis community that find themselves in court because of a technical violation or just misinformation about some ancillary thing that is flushed out or first time issue, and they find themselves not just with criminal charges but also asset forfeiture cases, which are seized for profit or arrest for profit. In some instances, a lot of the law enforcement communities fund their operations with that. Can those two things coexist, do you think?
When you say two things, what were the two things?
A dispensary bill that's creating revenue and possibly profits for people within the owners, business owners, investors, and people in the community. They're making money, and you've got a forfeiture law that, you know, operates on in the concept of illegal activity, what's defined as contraband, and a whole slew of things. Can those two things, you know, can you have a dispensary that's a for-profit and have forfeiture laws?
Well, that's interesting. Well, the whole thing is if we create at least framework at a state level, I don't see why that would be a big problem at a state level. It's this whole federal thing.
Well, I mean, you're going to find there will be the initial cases, of course, and there'll be some battles, and of course the intent is that the protections and the intent of the law will fall in favor of these people that are going to present themselves as such, and those that are going to participate in the program. But there's going to be, there's going to be some casualties, I'm sure, in the interpretation. That's kind of what's happened.
Michael's skeptical that the law is going to be respected as intended and without some type of additional language in there that provides for recourse in case law enforcement decides to be aggressive anyway.
Definitely, if you have ideas on that, forward them to me, because I don't think that this bill will pass exactly as is. We're going to make amendments as people give us different concerns and ideas. Yeah.
Jamie, I guess, pulled that out of me. I guess that was what I was saying. I've become a little disillusioned with some of the court decisions. You may be aware that right now, the Court of Appeals has ruled 18 times in favor of police officers and prosecutors on medical marijuana issues and 0 times in favor of patients and caregivers. And 9 of those cases had gone in favor of patients and caregivers at the trial level. So I guess that's what it was, Jamie. I guess I'm just completely bitter about that.
Yeah.
And I have never before in my career as a lawyer of 18 years ever even thought to seek legislative, remedies. Like, I'm always in court seeking remedies, but it's an interesting process for me where I can see how, the impact of these laws can really play out on the day-to-day things that are happening in court and have some solutions for the way people have been treated unfairly.
Well, I'll tell you what, we're at a very dynamic phase, and I know it's somewhat stressful, but at the same time exciting. A dispensary owner that I thought was a model that I was working with spent a week in jail. And I talked to him afterwards. He was very down. And I tried to tell him, the first chiropractors were jailed for practicing medicine without a license, and you're on the frontier. He didn't seem cheered up at all. But,
thanks for your honesty.
Yeah, but I just, was trying to, cheer him up that we're in a very dynamic phase right now, and this is all going to be tested, and it's evolving, and we got to, I think, fight through it, and eventually we'll reach a stable point where we have a functional system.
And when we do, and when we get to that land of peace and where people can go to work and not be afraid, we're going to remember that it was Representative Callton who was speaking the voice of reason. And I got to tell you that because it's nice to hear from the leaders that are there representing the people, are actually listening to the people. One of our special people here wants to ask you a question. Jamie, go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering, as a chiropractor with likely several clients with chronic pain issues, do you prefer, in some cases, or from what you've learned about cannabis, perhaps, that they may look at medical cannabis before getting into opiates or pharmaceuticals, if that's a direction where their pain management has to take them?
I'm glad you brought this up because I have been talking about this. I had and some of you may have been there, but I had a town hall on this in Berry County. We had a couple hundred people, and it got a lot of ideas got out there. That got things, me thinking about things, and there's a big discussion on it. Well, someone says, well, marijuana is a gateway drug. Oh, and everyone's just like, boo, And I started putting a lot of thought into, and I started listening to a lot of things. Listened to the Chevy Chase interview. He ends up in Betty Ford. His addiction started with low back pain medication. And I just listened to some testimony in another committee on a whole, nothing to do with marijuana, where her son became a heroin addict, and all started out with the narcotic analgesic for back pain. And then someone else says, and this was not on the subject of medical marijuana, that in their county they had one, or in their whatever municipality it was, they had one driving death but 8 prescription drug deaths. And it really got the wheels turning, and I started thinking, you know, the gateway drug is narcotic analgesics to a lot of people, and it made me wonder if everyone should have a trial of something that's not a narcotic analgesic.
Wow, I'd love to hear that.
Thank
You know,
you.
it was a thought. It made me think about that. And this whole discussion about, well, what is a gateway drug? You want to talk about a gateway drug, and then I'm thinking, look at some of the people who we've lost lately that we all know, like, say, Michael Jackson,
Whitney.
or Anna Nicole Smith, and even
Whitney
my
Houston.
wife.
You're
Whitney
talking about
Houston,
marijuana. You're not talking about dying.
the singer from London that we lost this year.
Oh yeah.
The singer,
Amy Winehouse.
Amy
Amy
Winehouse.
Winehouse.
Thank you, Christiana.
Yeah, and I'm reading, this is all prescription medicine these people are dying from. And
Go ahead, sir.
well, I'm just thinking, so what is the gateway? And this woman was talking about her son. Starts out, he got a prescription, he gets addicted to it, doctor stops prescribing it, he starts going to the streets to buy it, eventually figures out that heroin's cheaper than OxyContin.
Right.
And now she's got herself a heroin addict for her son. So what's the gateway drug here?
Yeah.
We talked last week about a story that the number of babies being born addicted to painkillers has tripled in the last decade. And, you know, they used to talk about, you know, crack babies in the 80s and 90s, and now it's prescription drug babies.
We know that overdoses are the #1 cause of death, too.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I'm saying. If you've got women who are of childbearing age, and I had several this evening that I treated in my office, and if you're just throwing out narcotic analgesics for their back pain, which would be easy to do, what if she gets pregnant while she's on it? I mean, they're of the age where they could conceive a baby while they're on the medicine that you prescribe them.
Yeah.
Serious conversation.
We read at the same time a study. This is something that needs, and I know it's a very touchy subject, but it's a conversation that needs to be had. But we read with it the study of Jamaica, from a study of pregnant mothers that showed that marijuana did not harm their newborns. It was a, you know,
They had healthier newborns.
Yep. Actually, it shows an increase in health.
They showed better APGAR scores.
Right.
I mean, you know, that's a touchy subject. Got a whole, you know, industry of, you know, child protective services that thrives on that stuff. It's difficult to change that way of thinking. But we had Lester Grimspoon on our show, and he referred to it. And there's been subsequent studies that have reinforced that. You were talking about analgesics. One of the other doctors we had on agreed that there's a condition known as a cannabinoid deficiency syndrome.
Okay.
You know, which would be like somebody that would normally need cannabinoids in their system, but would be off kilter, you know, chemically because of the lack of them having them. That people actually need cannabinoids to, you know, which we have receptors in our
They have
brains.
tolerance for pain and things like
Yeah.
that.
So you're talking about cannabinoid like it's a neurotransmitter?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, and there's, I mean, when you look at certain depression and you look at some diseases like myasthenia gravis that involve improper functioning of neurotransmitters, all the nerves are there and everything, but the neurotransmitter's not there. I don't really understand. I've had some discussion about cannabinoids and their actual physiological role, but I can't have a good discussion. It's not something that I learned when I went to school.
Somebody wants to know, what was your thoughts on the farmers market model, if any?
So the farmers, yeah, and I didn't really understand it, and I got, you know, some explanation of it, you know, this week. I first really heard of it in the last 2 months, and it was kind of stretching my brain a little bit because there's definitely a different model. I don't think it's based under present law that it's legal. I'm not saying it's a bad model.
I would personally love to take you to one.
Would you? I'd like to go to one.
We could go when it's closed, so you obviously can come in.
But it kind of, okay, I did talk with some people, I won't mention names, but they wanted to see, instead of a dispensary model, they wanted to see a cooperative of caregivers, where you weren't locked into just taking care of 5 people, and let's say you can produce a good crop, you can buy the crop from another caregiver, and this seemed kind of an extension of that concept. Definitely a different model, but, I don't think it's permissible under present law unless there was something carved out for that type of model. But it kind of, in a way, kind of seems like a dispensary because you might have people who are just buying from farmers and then stay at the market and then just really are just distributors.
Right?
Can we talk
regular
about that?
brick and mortar.
They're very similar, actually.
Yeah. So you don't have an active building that's a dispensary, but you're functioning like a dispensary.
Correct. What essentially the idea is that you there's a safe transfer location where people might rent tables like they would at any farmer's market to sell their fruit or their goods that they might bring, and they bring their goods and they sit at a table and patients come in, they walk through, and patients, and there's whatever the arrangement is, either a rental fee or they pay at the door per their sales or whatnot. There may be testing, there may be
Support
groups, some education there. They may have
medibles and
medicals.
I would actually think that a similar model could be worked out with the municipality under 5580.
Well, it's definitely a different model. And like I said, I first heard of it in the last couple of months, and then I got, a better explanation over the last week of, what it is, how it works. I've never seen one. I did like the idea, one idea of one farmer's market that was using some of proceeds to purchase for people who couldn't afford. I thought that was kind of neat.
Well, I like to describe it as like a fish market where caregivers can come and be able to take care of their patients' needs. And with that concept, it actually regulates the market very well because you often find the lower prices, the better wholesale access.
Yeah, the idea is that it takes away removes the distributor, the overhead and the middleman, and you just come to market and you sell. That was the idea, and sometimes that may have an effect on reducing prices, but there's other challenges to that too, because whoever's managing it wants to keep a certain quality. They're going to have to require probably to test, or not required to, but they're going to want to test, and they're going to want to make some assurances to the patients. But most importantly, there's got to be a method of being able to, I would think, account for the money and where it's going. And there's got to be some kind of guidelines. Otherwise, it's going to create concerns, I would think, from, what are the limits, what are the numbers, and how does that happen? But those are in the details, I would think.
Well, and that's it. It seems like there's a lot of control issues that, a dispensary would have the ability to have so much more control. And I'm not, I'm just learning about this model. Definitely a different way to do it. But it would seem like there are control factors.
But not something that couldn't be carved out of the existing bill. That's what Jamie was saying, is that with the way in which this bill's written, or even, maybe, I don't know, some adjustments there allows for a local community to say we're not going to have a dispensary, but instead we're going to allow for the market to take place, and you're allowed to have, this many in this area or whatever it may be, and these are the rules. And
you're a lawyer. You think so?
I got to look at
the bill?
I would have to look at it a little bit more. But listen, I like to interpret the original act a lot more broadly. Not that I ever advise people, but I saw it as a much more broad protection than it's being interpreted by Justice O'Connell exclusively.
Well, I don't know if a dispensary, I think in my mind, when I have a provisionary center, I think of a building with walls. I tend to just think of a rectangle. kind of simplistic thought, but it doesn't say it has to have walls.
Well, I would like to say...
It doesn't say it can't be in a barn.
Well, it doesn't have to be outside. I mean, I guess when you say farmer's market, it doesn't have to be outside under a tent and, you know...
Yeah, they usually aren't.
Well, it could be in the same kind of building where you have it, you know, kind of medicals it could be. You may test before you come in and go out. And, I mean, there's all kinds of... It's in the details. I just... it would be nice if there was... it would be nice if, you know, in the spirit of what I think your bill intends to do, there is a true kind of completely local option. Like you may have a bunch of people that prefer, I know, but it's going to be in the details completely because you're always going to have issues of, you know, control and the level of comfort that's going to be had between the community and law enforcement.
That's, you know, I'll just admit, it's making me think a little differently. Like, let's say you have a provisionary center, and they can buy overage from caregivers, and what if the caregivers are all there at the same time in patients? And the provisionary center is buying it and right from the caregivers right there and redistributing it right there. That's not completely unlike, from what I understand, the farmer's market.
Right.
That's right. That's exactly right. They are very similar, actually, when you really break it down, and they're based off a similar concept of the law.
Functionally, they are very, very similar.
When I've actually given some local regulation to Representative Kevin Daly, who's my representative, who's a sponsor on this bill, and it kind of does pertain to both systems and collectives. It's very unbiased as far as towards law enforcement. I'm sure a lot would be thrown in there, but it is kind of a broad regulation.
4 minutes left, and I feel like we could talk for another hour and a half, and then we're going to have you back on because this has just been a real, I think, informative discussion, and I think those that are listening are going to get a better idea of what the intent is. I think you've answered a lot of questions that people have had.
I'd like to hear what you have to say out there, because, you know, I've been working on this in the microcosm of the legislature, and, you know, I really have not gotten a lot of input from out there, from people. You know, so if you can forward letters to me, forward ideas to me, thoughts.
We have a pretty lengthy thread going on the Michigan Medical Marijuana site about the bill right now, so we can definitely send you an email
we'll summarize.
Link with that.
We'll summarize, and no, but that's very, very kind of you, and it's not often that you get that where that you actually want to, and that's what we've been asking for. I think more than anything is that you know, the community be part of the discussion, and we appreciate that so much.
Yep.
You can expect emails from me.
Yeah. Thank you for calling. Wonderful to speak to you this evening.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Have a great night, sir. We appreciate it. Thank you.
See you soon.
Bye.
All right.